Have a list of the top 10 potential free agents at CBSSports.com. Harden is number one with that player option, followed by Zach LaVine, who is unrestricted. The only other unrestricted free agent on this list is Jalen Brunson, who comes in at number 8. Many of the other guys either restricted or with player options for next season. Let's bring in a couple of our NBA experts, Bill Reiter and Colin Ward-Henninger, and let's start with Deandre Ayton. Bill, he is a restricted free agent, but things really unraveled there toward the end of this season in Phoenix. What happens with him?
Yeah, you said it, Chris. Unraveled with that organization, and really even before that, unraveled in that relationship between Deandre Ayton and the Phoenix Suns. There's certainly a scenario where the Suns do whatever they have to do to pay him and keep him, but that would take them into some dangerous, at least from their perspective, tax territory. And as I understand it, talking to sources, and this isn't a secret, everyone in the NBA knows this, Deandre Ayton does not and did not feel valued by that organization. So teams that are willing to pay him and see a lot of upside, especially offensively, include the Spurs, include the Magic, and for me, if I were betting on this, I think the Detroit Pistons make a lot of sense as an organization that is bereft of the kind of talent that they want outside of Cade Cunningham, that feels like they're building something for the long term. Ayton's still a young guy in the right situation with the right offensive talent around him. There's a sense, not universal, but from a lot of folks around the NBA, that he can be a great player consistently. He's going to get paid somewhere, and for me it's Detroit, but I certainly think it'll be somewhere most likely other than Phoenix.
Yeah, for me, I think the best decision DeAndre could make from a basketball perspective is going back to Phoenix, kind of mending whatever fences need to be mended there so that that team can continue to compete for championships. But if I'm looking at DeAndre Ayton, the human being, the guy who's the number one pick, a guy who reportedly feels undervalued by the franchise, who doesn't just want to be a guy who sets screens and rolls and does the little things and plays defense. A team like, all the teams that Bill mentioned are certainly in play. Another team that's reportedly got interest is the Portland Trail Blazers. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. That would give Ayton the opportunity to go there and be the number 2 next to Damian Lillard, get to showcase his skills. And for Portland, they're looking for a guy who they can bring in and give Damian Lillard some hope. Say, hey, look, our franchise is headed in the right direction. We're headed back to the postseason, back to contention. And Ayton, I think, is a guy that can do that. So for me, basketball-wise, it might make most sense for DeAndre Ayton to go back to Phoenix. But as a human being, as a basketball player, as a guy who wants to show everyone what he's capable of on a big stage, I think that Portland is actually a team that makes a lot of sense for DeAndre Ayton.
Colin says the Blazers are the best landing spot. Bill says the Pistons are the best landing spot. Bill, what would the Suns do? Where would they go from here with an aging Chris Paul, a season in which they had the best record in the NBA and then flamed out in the postseason? If it's not DeAndre Ayton, where do you go?
Yeah, talking to the folks in that organization, I think there's a disconnect between how they value DeAndre Ayton, how they think DeAndre Ayton should value the Phoenix Suns, and how he'll be valued by the rest of the league. And Colin hit on that. There is still, as I understand it, a hope within that Suns organization that Ayton will see the progress he has made. And let's give Chris Paul credit, certainly the people within the Suns hierarchy do, for helping Ayton become the guy that's lived up somewhat to that number 1 overall draft pick billing. So their plan is DeAndre Ayton, and there's a sense that they think they can convince him to remain and to be there. If he's not there, there's not a lot of choices out there for centers you can go get. Bobby Portis Jr. is a guy that would be an option if he's not in Milwaukee. Dwight Howard's not the top of anyone's list, but that's someone whose name has been tossed around as an affordable option. But as I understand it, the Phoenix Suns really hope and think DeAndre Ayton should look at the success they've had on the court, should understand there's a window right now as a championship team that certainly lasts however long Chris Paul's window lasts, and they're hoping that he'll agree to take what he views as a discount and what they view as an investment in success and winning and continuing to grow into a very, very good player for a young guy who has the opportunity, if he's really good going forward, to get another big-time contract at some point.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I think that the Suns certainly want to move forward with Ayton next to their other host of tremendous players, and they think they can compete for championships. But I think they proved last season when they brought in Bismack Biyombo, when they had JaVale McGee starting for certain periods when DeAndre Ayton was out. If Chris Paul is at his peak, he can take almost any center and turn them into a viable center offensively. As long as they're a lob threat, as long as they have decent enough hands to catch the ball. Chris Paul has proven that he can take a center and make them, into a starting caliber center on a team like the Phoenix Suns. So if they're not willing to pay DeAndre Ayton the max, if he gets a max offer sheet, or if Ayton just says, you know what, I am done with this organization, I think, as Bill mentioned, there's some free agent center options. And I think that given the construction of that team, I don't think they necessarily need a center who's going to be offensively aggressive. I think they need someone who can play defense, protect the rim, and catch lobs from Chris Paul. So I think moving forward, that's the kind of what they're going to have to weigh if they want to pay Ayton to come back, or whether they think, hey, look, we can get by with kind of an average level NBA starter given the rest of our roster.
Free agency beginning in about 3 weeks, June the 30th. And one name that is going to be up for grabs is unrestricted free agent Zach LaVine, who, Colin, is still young. He has shown that he can be a prolific scorer. What would be Zach LaVine's best fit?
Well, Zach LaVine, the world is his oyster. He's going to have a lot of options out there. Dallas is an intriguing one for me, just seeing him next to Luka Doncic and what that would look like. But to me, I think it's the simple answer. It's go back to the Bulls. This team was doing really, really well earlier in the year before they were just hammered by injuries. The lineup of LaVine, Lonzo Ball, Vucevic, DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso had a plus 12.5 net rating. They were absolutely destroying people, obviously limited minutes because of the injuries, but I think there is certainly enough there for Zach LaVine to think, hey, look, I can go back to this team and we can be a championship contender, if not next season, maybe the season after that. Add in the fact that obviously the Bulls can pay him more money, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer to go back to Chicago at this point for Zach LaVine.
Yeah, I co-sign everything Colin just said, and I agree with everything he said. But I can tell you, and I know Colin knows this too, that there's certainly optimism around I think this is the most interesting free agency question, guys, in this free agency class of the guys that we think are going to be available. What's Zach LaVine's going to do? They have some optimism in Portland that they can make a run at him. They have some optimism in San Antonio they can make a run at him. They have some optimism in LA they can make a run at him. I don't know what they're drinking in LA, but they do think that they don't have the space. They got rid of Westbrook because Zach LaVine and they built, as Colin walked us through, the Bulls built their team, their present, which is promising, in their future, which is really encouraging, around the idea Zach LaVine was going to stick around. But at the end of the year, in the last few weeks, some of his comments, some of the things that he said publicly, and as I understand it, some of the things he said privately, have raised serious concerns in Chicago, and again, have gotten other folks motivated around the NBA. It's almost like you have a girlfriend and you feel like you're in a really good place and she's going on a little, two-week vacation. You don't want at the airport in the goodbye for her to say how much she's loved your time together and whatever happens, it's been great, and whatever the future holds, you've always had these memories. And that's what, in effect, Zach LaVine has been saying about his time in Chicago. I'm with Colin. He should stay with the Bulls. I'd like to see him in Chicago, but it sounds like he's going to test the market. He's open to the idea of going somewhere else. And like Colin said, of all those options, I think Dallas is the realistic one. I think as a player, to play with Luka Doncic would be exhilarating. And I think in terms of the ceiling that you can create, you're not going to recreate what you have, the opportunity in Chicago. I think Dallas, if he wants to leave, is really fascinating.
And Dallas so close to breaking through this season, close to the NBA Finals. They've got the superstar Luka Doncic. That would make Dallas even more intriguing as they look for another superstar to put alongside Luka, because Kristaps Porzingis did not work out. Let's move on to Kyrie Irving, who has that superstar with him, and Kevin Durant in Brooklyn. Durant still under contract. Kyrie likely to re-sign with the Nets. At least that's the latest report. He's got that player option. What are you hearing about him, Bill?
Yeah, that is what I'm hearing. That the Nets, who have been very vocal the last few weeks, have talked pretty openly. Sean Marks, who runs basketball operations, has said, we want guys who want to be here. We want guys who are available. We want guys who want to be team players. That is not a general statement about what they want. That is a pointed statement at Kyrie Irving. And the reason they say that, and they can say that, is because they feel like they have some leverage. Is Kyrie Irving still massively talented and highly valued by some teams and GMs out there? Yes, but that's been diminished somewhat by the theatrics away from the court. And the other reality, guys, if you look at contending basketball teams and or teams that are just in markets where you'd presume Kyrie Irving wants to go and live and play, he's very particular, that's fine. They have point guards, most of those places. They have options in terms of what Kyrie Irving does. It doesn't seem likely Kyrie Irving is going to be beating a path to Detroit or to Portland or to the Spurs, who have the room and the cap space and maybe the ambition to go after him. So I think what I'm hearing is I think they will re-sign Kyrie Irving. There's a sense in that organization that they can get him for less than what the max would be, that he will not opt into that player option of around $40 $47 million, and maybe there's a shorter deal, 3 years perhaps, that can be done in the $25 to $35 million range. But as with all things Kyrie Irving, the folks that I've talked to, and I would presume the people in charge in Brooklyn, are aware you can think you have your arms around Kyrie, where his head at, what he's going to do, if he's going to show up for work, and you can be mistaken. So it sounds like he'll be back in Brooklyn, guys, but it's Kyrie Irving, and it literally is anyone's guess until it's done.
Yeah, this is the guy who went out and told Boston fans that he was coming back and then decided to go to Brooklyn. So we never know what Kyrie Irving is going to do. For him, I think going back to Brooklyn makes the most sense because, there have been reports that the trade market for Kyrie is basically zero. Nobody wants this guy because nobody knows what he's going to do, whether he's going to show up and play, what kind of problems he's going to cause in the locker room. So as talented as he is on the floor, I don't know if there's really going to be a team out there that says, hey, I really want to bring Kyrie Irving into the mix and take this franchise to the next level. And for the Nets, they're kind of, in a bind here because Kevin Durant came to Brooklyn to play with Kyrie Irving. And clearly, he feels that he's one of his best options to get back to the NBA Finals and win another title. So the Nets don't really have a lot of options. I think, as Bill was mentioning, if Kyrie would opt into that player option, that would probably be their Brooklyn's ideal scenario because then they could just kind of play it out for a year and see what happens. But I don't know if Kyrie's going to be comfortable doing that. So if they do have to sign him to an extension, that number is going to be one of the most intriguing things that we see this offseason because you can't give him a max because you just don't know what he's going to be. So seeing whether Kyrie is willing to take a little bit less to make sure, give them some sort of assurance that he's going to be around, he's going to be committed to this franchise. But as Bill mentioned, things can change day to day with Kyrie Irving. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that develop.
And if I can just add into what Colin said, earlier this season, I was with an Eastern Conference GM, and he was in a pretty candid mood. Sometimes it happens, right? And they're sharing a little more than they might. So I just asked, didn't have any sort of dog in the hunt with Kyrie Irving, what he thought of Kyrie. Give me a candid assessment. And this person walked me, guys, through a 5-minute soliloquy of all the things he thought was wrong with Kyrie, gossip I'd never heard before. It was borderline character assassination that was basically off the record. And he worked himself up and talked about Kyrie and all these details that may or may not be true. And when it was done, I said, oh, so you wouldn't sign him, you wouldn't bring him into this organization. And he looked down, looked up at me, said, and used a word I can't use on CBS Sports HQ, and said, no, man, I'd bring him in. He's too talented. So that's the thing with Kyrie. Nobody wants him, but everybody's tempted by him if he looks at that organization and shows some interest. It really is a catch-22.
Yeah, it's a high ceiling, that's for sure, because we've seen what he can do when he has the right player by him with LeBron James in Cleveland winning a championship, and Kyrie was a huge, huge part of that. Let's move on to a team that just cannot find its way to a championship, and that's the Utah Jazz, a team that might be completely rebuilding. At this point, it's just at the head coach position. Quinn Snyder stepping down. They're looking for a new one. Bill, there are reports that they have gotten trade calls for Donovan Mitchell, but they don't want to hear any of those calls as of now. What's going on?
Yeah, so the same sources that told me that Quinn Snyder would not be the head coach a few months ago told me Quinn Snyder would not be the head coach when we got to this point of the year around the NBA. Had no idea, and those that I've reached back out to still don't know what Danny Ainge is thinking, who's now in charge of basketball operations as it relates to Donovan Mitchell. The smart play, guys, and what I imagine is going on is that Danny wants to rebuild that entire organization. We've seen him in Boston, his ability to draft properly and make the kind of decisions that can build a winner in the long term. Give all the credit in the world to Brad Stevens and Ime Udoka for the fact the Celtics are in the NBA Finals, but it's Danny Ainge who put that team together. But it's all well and good to decide you want Donovan Mitchell there and to move all the other pieces and maybe have a couple years of transition. We're in an era of player power where if Donovan Mitchell doesn't want to do that, doesn't feel like Ainge is his guy, or is frustrated and put out that Quinn Snyder's not there, and I have heard, and there's been several reports that is the case, I think there's certainly a situation where we've seen this. Donovan Mitchell could just decide quietly or otherwise to try and force his way somewhere else. So the teams that I've talked to that have an interest in Donovan Mitchell don't know whether or not he's available, tell me he's not available now, but are holding out hope that there might be some movement if Donovan Mitchell gets frustrated enough that he goes to Ainge and says, I don't want to be a part of whatever rebuild without Quinn Snyder you aren't planning.
So let's just pretend like he is available and the Jazz are listening. Colin, put together a trade proposal for Donovan Mitchell, and where would he end up?
Yeah, I mean, I got on the trade machine and did whatever I could do, work some magic, And to me, I think a spot that makes a lot of sense for him is the Knicks. This is a team that has been talked about around Donovan Mitchell for a while, ever since Utah's kind of discontent has come up. And for the Knicks, if they're going to be able to get a player of Donovan Mitchell's caliber, an all-NBA, all-star level player in his prime, they're going to have to give up a lot. So I think the trade package is going to have to be centered around, some 3 future first-round picks. You could do 2023, 2025, and 2027. That's a huge haul. And then a couple of interesting young players in Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin, and then some salary filler in Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel. That math works out. I think, it seems really hefty if you're a Knicks fan, but this is a team that, last season was a giant disappointment. They had looked like they had made some progress the season before, and then they went backwards. You're looking at that roster and saying, which one of these players is going to lead me to a championship? Maybe RJ Barrett, maybe. So if you can get a guy like Donovan Mitchell and not have to give up a guy like Barrett, I think that's something that they would certainly have to look into if Donovan Mitchell decides that he no longer wants to be in Utah.
Yeah, no secret, Donovan Mitchell would like to be a New York Knick, or certainly enticed by the idea. I'm skeptical that Danny Ainge would be willing to make that trade, guys, in large part because it's one thing to have Ainge come in, he's going to build a winner. It's another thing to tear down a team that has been very successful in the regular season and convince ownership, and I don't know what conversations they've had. We're going to go from that to a complete start over. We are not going to have any competitiveness at all. And that's what it is if you're trading for those picks. It's certainly in the realm of what's possible. I'm not sure personally, and I don't know how Danny Ainge evaluates those players. I don't know if the Knicks have enough. A scenario that was thrown out to me that kind of raised my eyebrows from an NBA source that I thought was interesting was Daryl Morey and that Sixers team, because Daryl likes to go big game hunting. I know it doesn't necessarily feel like a fit necessarily with James Harden, but the idea that you could move on from Tobias Harris and he has some value and that he would leverage, because we've seen Daryl do this before, whatever he has to just pack a bunch of stars, I think is interesting. And I think the Miami Heat are a fascinating possibility. They've got some young players. We know Pat Riley, even though they've done better in the draft the last few years, doesn't value draft picks the way that most other organizations do. Now, Miami Heat draft picks aren't going to be as valuable because presumably they're going to be a pretty good team, whereas the Knicks probably aren't going to be. So even with Mitchell, so we'll see. But I think for the New York Knicks, I think it's a really hard thing to pull off. And if Donovan Mitchell becomes available, he'll have a lot of say in that. But I think it has to be a massive, massive return in Utah, a overwhelming return for that to happen.
And as of right now, Utah not listening to trade offers. But as we know, there's a price for just about everybody, especially in the NBA right now, especially for a team that's looking to get over the hump and starting over with a new head coach. Fellas, stick around. We're coming right back to you in just a couple of minutes. The NBA draft is just a couple of weeks away now, and then free agency beginning 3 weeks from tomorrow, June the 30th, July the 1st, Vegas Summer League mid-July, and then training camps begin in September. Darvin Ham era underway in Los Angeles. Avery Johnson saying it's a good thing they gave him quite a few years because it's going to take him a while to right this ship. They're coming off a season in which they finished 11th in the West, and that guy right there, Russell Westbrook, probably the main reason why they're going to have a difficult time fielding a contending team next season, because he is going to handcuff the team by opting in to his $47 million cap hit next season. James Herbert was on with us earlier. He said there's a less than 0% chance Russell Westbrook would opt out of that. Doesn't make any sense because he would be losing money to do that. We'll see what the Lakers can do with LeBron heading into the final season of his contract. Chris Hassel joined by Bill Reiter and Colin Ward-Henninger. Bill, just set us up to date right now. Explain why the Lakers are in such a mess, the Russell Westbrook situation included.
The reality is, and James is right, there's a 0% chance. It is a number that is exactly zero. That Russell Westbrook, who is not valuable, who is not particularly impressive on the basketball court, and who has no market value whatsoever, is going to opt out of almost $50 million. And that means that the Lakers have almost no flexibility. I know we're going to have a conversation here about free agency. I called and talked to a very reliable Lakers source today about what they could do. But if you made a list of the 15 most important things the Los Angeles Lakers require in order to to operate in free agency, 1 through 14 are get rid of Russell Westbrook, which I don't know is possible, and 15 is figure out who you want to use the mid-level exception on, or if you want to split it up, because they do have that option, that possibility. That's a single player they can bring in that is of any consequence if they still have Russell Westbrook on that roster. So outside of finding some way, and I don't see what it is, and neither of the sources I talk to get Russell Westbrook off of your roster and bring in other pieces and then create some flexibility, this Lakers team, outside of one person, is going to look largely like the one we just saw.
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers are up a creek. I mean, there's not a lot that they can do in free agency. I think what was kind of stood out to me is Darvin Ham in his introductory press conference. They asked him about Russell Westbrook and what are you going to do with this guy? He obviously said these were discussions that were had during the interview process, coming up with a plan on how he's going to use Westbrook, and he used one word. He said sacrifice. And that's something that Russell Westbrook is going to have to do. Now, whether Darvin Ham can get through to him and make him do that is a completely different question. But if he is willing to sacrifice, you could put him in sort of this Bruce Brown, Gary Payton II type of role where you're a guard who sets screens and rolls to the basket and cuts off the ball, something Russell Westbrook has never done in his entire career. But if he's willing to do that, then you go look at the free agent market and say, hey, maybe we can get a true backup point guard. A guy like Tyus Jones comes to mind. I don't know if he's going to be willing to take what the Lakers have to offer, but somebody who can play off the ball and shoot, someone who can also run the offense, allow Russell Westbrook to roam off the ball to kind of create havoc in that sense. So it's going to take a lot. The Lakers do not have a lot of options because of all the money owed to those guys. But if Russell Westbrook is willing to take on a different role, there are some options out there that can come in and at least kind of bolster what the Lakers have.
Yeah, maybe they can convince him to take a different role. I doubt they'll convince him to take any less money and opt out of that deal. Bill, you mentioned something a little while ago that I thought was interesting, and I'm sure Colin did too, that the Lakers source that you talked to thinks that they have an opportunity to get Zach LaVine. How?
The source told me that there are people in the organization who think they have a chance to get rid of Zach LaVine. This source laughed ruefully at that notion, and it comes back to the so it requires two things that I think are difficult sales pitches. The first is getting rid of Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook has to be somewhere else, and you can't bring back the same amount of cap space in return. That's number one. And again, I don't think they can do that. And the other is to convince Zach LaVine to come back out to the West Coast and play with LeBron James. But if you look at the betting odds in Vegas where LaVine might be if he's not a Bull, if you talk to people around the NBA, it is absolutely no secret that the Lakers have told people, have expressed that is an ambition of theirs. But this is the same group of folks who went out and got Russell Westbrook, traded away a bunch of pieces that weren't sexy but were important to that championship run and gave them some flexibility and put themselves in this position in the first place. If James Herbert and I and common sense are absolutely wrong, and Russell Westbrook goes golfing with Andrew Luck and Barry Sanders and comes out of the 18 and says, what the hell, I'm going to retire, this sounds great, or some other miracle as far as the Lakers are concerned, that I think would be a very real option. But it's really hard to pull off, and it's fine to have ambitions, guys. I have an ambition to dunk a basketball someday, but like that goal for me, the Lakers can dream about Zach LaVine all they want. The physics of that are probably impossible.
Yeah, it seems like a stretch. Get rid of one UCLA alum in Russell Westbrook and bring in another one in Zach LaVine. Hope this one works out better. Ideally, basketball-wise, that would be great for the Lakers. He would fit in perfectly with LeBron James and Anthony Davis as that kind of scoring guard, a guy who can handle playmaking duties. But this is a dream. I don't see this happening. One thing that's interesting about this scenario is, say LeBron James went to Zach LaVine and said, hey, man, you're our missing piece. You're the guy we need to get back to the title contention. Come on in. I don't know if LeBron James has the same sway with this younger generation of players. It'd be really interesting to see, particularly given the decisions that LeBron James has made in recent years, bringing in Russell Westbrook, obviously the most recent one. So on paper, LaVine would be a great fit. He might be interested in coming to LA. A lot of NBA players have houses out here. I'm sure he does, having lived in the area for a while. But I just don't see it, given the other options on the table for LaVine and the fact that he would be coming to a roster that basically had him, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and a bunch of spare parts.
So if Russell Westbrook is back and it's like 100% chance that that's going to happen, that he's going to have that $47 million cap hit next season. Bill, what can the Lakers do realistically?
All right, so I'll give you what they want to do on the sort of lower end of excitement level for Lakers fans and the realistic option. They would like to bring Malik Monk back and do it on the mid-level exception. But Malik Monk, who was on a one-year deal, outplayed his contract, and I think outplayed the mid-level by a wide margin. And it would not surprise me if Malik Monk goes somewhere and gets $12 or $15 or $18 million a year. I mean, it wasn't a very good team for the Lakers, and there weren't a lot of good decisions that were made in the front office, but Malik Monk was one of them. So that's the goal. That's the option, according to the sources I've talked to. But other people that they've talked about, and not with the same level of excitement, is a guy like Rudy Gobert or a guy like Patty Mills. And those two guys are actual examples, and that is the level of player that they're able to bring in, and that does not, I think, instill a lot of confidence. Taking a risk on Malik Monk, who was young, had a bad experience in Charlotte. You knew at least coming out of college he could shoot, he was athletic. That made sense. Rudy Gobert has been injury prone, just has been the same player for several years. And Patty Mills has a nice career, but again, at this point of his career, this stage of where he's at, not a difference maker. And that, guys, as we're talking about, is the really difficult position the Lakers are in. They can talk about Zach LaVine. They can even talk about Malik Monk. The reality are guys maybe like Rudy Gobert or Patty Mills or other players who kind of want to live in L.A. And I'll say this. Bobby Portis Jr. was thrown out to me, and a source did make this point, a more optimistic Lakers source. He said, hey, we can offer maybe a chance at a championship, even though that seems silly. He told me it's LeBron James, it's Anthony Davis, but we can also offer playing time to guys who don't get playing time in other places. Otto Porter Jr. was a name he threw out there. He said, we might be able to sell Otto Porter Jr. on a little bit less money on the mid-level, but also we'll play you 32 minutes a game. Who the hell else we're going to start is what he told me. So maybe the Lakers can find a higher level of the MLE because they can offer minutes. But again, to me, that sounds a lot more optimistic than like a really well-reasoned plan from that Lakers organization.
And this is the final year that LeBron is under contract. Colin, could this be it for LeBron in LA?
I think all indications are that LeBron wants to stay in LA for the rest of his career, however long that is. He's mentioned many, many times that he would like to play with his son at some point. And, who knows whether the Lakers are in position to get him. If they continue to miss the playoffs, they probably will be. But I don't see LeBron leaving, but there's always an opportunity. He has kind of thrown those hints out there that he might want to return to Cleveland at one point and kind of finish where he started. But let's not forget that LeBron James is playing at an incredibly high level. What we saw last season is pretty much unprecedented, particularly after the Lakers are kind of out of contention and he was just going out there putting up 50 pieces and things like that. He is still capable of being, if not the best, at least the second best player on a championship team. And we haven't seen a healthy Anthony Davis. So if the Lakers come out, and no matter what happens with this Russell Westbrook situation, if Anthony Davis has a healthy, productive season and LeBron James is somewhere close to what we saw last season, I think he's going to have enough there to say, look, let's just stay the course. Hopefully we can get a big-time free agent after Russell Westbrook's contract is gone. Maybe pick up, find some gold in the draft, or like Bill was talking about, guys who want to come to LA and take, a little bit less for more playing time, or the opportunity to live in Los Angeles. I think LeBron will be able to look and see, look, we have had a couple down years, but there's still enough hope here for me to finish this thing out in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the LeBron James situation a year from now, for all the reasons Colin just walked us through, I think is utterly and totally fascinating. There's certainly gossip, water cooler talk around the NBA about the idea of LeBron, as Colin noted, wanting to go back to Cleveland. And I'll just piggyback on an incredibly good point that Colin made earlier. The problem is there's some doubt about whether that very young core want LeBron James to be there, given the fact, as Colin said, he doesn't resonate with young guys the way that he used to. And it's understood that LeBron sucks all the oxygen out of a room and has very particular requirements in terms of how things function when he's there. Not a criticism, it's just the way it is. And a lot of young guys, and frankly a lot of really good young locker rooms around the NBA, would probably protect against that, talking to some GMs that are out there. I'm with Colin. I think LeBron sees this season through. One thing he's never done ever in his career is force his way out of a place like other guys that we've seen. He loves Los Angeles, and whether it's true or it's not true, whether Rob Pelinka should or shouldn't be the guy making the decisions in LA, when Russell Westbrook is gone in a year, when that contract is up, it gives the Lakers the ability to sell the idea, whether it's a fantasy or not, that they can now build something that's worthy of the end of LeBron's years. Russell Westbrook is the problem, but he also, when he sticks around, I think becomes the scapegoat, which I think increases the odds they can sell LeBron, and LeBron can sell himself on the fact that he can stay with the Lakers and have it all in a year.
Yeah, and looking ahead to next season, I mean, usually people are willing to put money on the Lakers when they have LeBron James, when they don't have LeBron James. Not happening right now for next season's futures. The Lakers are not even close to one of the favorites next season. You barely find them on this list, all the way down at 22-1 to win next year's NBA championship. Going into this season, it was the Nets and the Lakers, the two favorites, and both came up way, way short. Coming up next, the guys will look at the finals players who maybe have earned new deals with their play, like Al Horford, the new three-point sharpshooter, Al Horford.
As we get set for Game 3, we're already looking down the road a bit for both of the Celtics and the Warriors. And for that, we welcome in CBS Sports NBA writer James Herbert, who is in Boston for us for this one, and analyst Bill Reiter, who joins us from Connecticut. All right, let's start with the Celtics and center Al Horford. In coming back to the Celtics and helping them get to the finals, it means almost $20 million of his contract is guaranteed next season. James, did his play in the playoffs so far secure his spot here for the long term?
Yeah, I mean, at least until the end of next season. Coming into this season, people didn't know exactly how it was going to go with Al Horford. People saw his contract as something close to an albatross, and it is just flat not that case at all anymore. He's been incredible for the Celtics, not just in the postseason, but all year long. He's been maybe their most consistent player. I mean, defensively, offensively, it's not just, he had a big, three-point shooting night in Game 1. He's been bringing it basically this whole time. And it's not even a question anymore about what will happen with his contract next season. By making the finals, $19.5 million of the $26.5 million is now guaranteed. But look, they were never going to cut him anyway after he started playing like this.
Yeah, James is 100% right. And, that beautiful building behind James can be the home for Al Horford, within reason of his market value, I think, for a long time. Because not only, as James pointed out, has his defense and offense been excellent and has that consistency been critical to what they do, especially going back to the mid-end of January when they were under 500 and have been exceptional since then. There's just a real leadership factor from Al Horford, and there's a toughness factor, which matters and is important, and people will tell you, including in that Celtics organization, was an important piece for a talented basketball team that is still led by young guys. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, even Marcus Smart are on the young side, even if they've been in the league for a while. So Al Horford, as James said, has earned that guarantee of most of that contract, and when they decide to negotiate in a year, I would imagine that Al Horford's going to get not over market value, but the opportunity, because of what he provides on and off the floor, to be a Celtic for a long time. And just let me add this, guys, too. Just talking to folks who know Al Horford, this is obviously someone with a long career who didn't have an opportunity until now to play in the finals, who people wrote off at his last couple stops. And so, as I understand it, he's got a lot of appreciation for Boston and a lot of love for the fact, from his view, his career, the way he's viewed, these opportunities late in his career were given to him by an organization, a winning organization, when others would not.
Horford certainly is someone who's giving value to Boston and appreciative of the opportunity. All right, let's talk about Kevon Looney, unrestricted free agent coming up this summer. He's been a good fit for the Warriors, but what does the future look like for him past this series, James?
Yeah, as you said, unrestricted free agent. I think it would be crazy if he ended up anywhere else other than Golden State. He's such a perfect fit for what they do offensively, just in terms of the screen setting, the passing that he brings, the offensive rebounding. He's been a monster on the offensive glass all throughout the playoffs. And then defensively, I mean, he's been holding up on these switches against star wing players, doing, I think, even more than maybe the Warriors anticipated. It's not that they've never seen it before. We saw glimpses of this in the past. He did this against Houston in the playoffs before. He has showed up in big moments and done it in the playoffs, but for him to stay healthy all year, be that rock for this Warriors front court, it has been incredible. He was really proud to have played in all 82 in the regular season after all the injuries that he's been through in his NBA career. And a guy that's such a culture fit, that's so valued and appreciated by his teammates in the Bay. Like, I would be shocked if he ended up going elsewhere in the summer.
And so would some of the officials I've talked to, the sources around the NBA guys, including a source who works with that Warriors organization. He's almost cocky, sure to the point of cockiness that Looney is going to stick around. And you understand why. There's a remarkable culture there, as James pointed out. And as we've seen Gary Payton II, Jordan Poole, go down the list, that organization, Steve Kerr, his staff, everything they do has brought up the best in a lot of guys and put people in position to get minutes, to have careers, to get paid in ways maybe they otherwise wouldn't have other places. And it's obviously an organization whose ownership group is well funded, is not afraid to go into the tax. That has resulted in some serious grumbling around the NBA over the last few weeks. They look at the payroll and the prospective payroll and the crazy amount of tax that could be paid, which remember gets divided up and given to the other 29 teams. If Kevon Looney wants to stick around, if he wants to be there, and certainly people in that organization thinks that he does, James is right. I think it would be a mistake for him, and it would be shocking if he went somewhere else.
A term that we came to despise certainly during COVID, load management, not a term that was used much with Looney this past season, as you mentioned, playing in 82 games. All right, when it comes to Gary Payton II, the Warriors, they have his early bid rights. So, I mean, they can sign him for a bit more than the mid-level exception. Publicly, he has said that he does want to stay. James, is he there next season?
I think he will be. I think the Warriors are plenty motivated to bring him back. You look at what he did immediately stepping in off of a broken elbow and changing the game completely in Game 2 of the NBA Finals. Like what he did defensively, just pressuring the Celtics stars. I mean, this is a guy, he's really, you look at him, he's 6'2", 6'3", and he's out there guarding Jason Tatum on the perimeter and giving him problems. He's unafraid to do that. That's what he's done all season long. He guards you 94 feet. He can switch. He can guard bigger guys. I mean, he was matched up with Nikola Jokic earlier this year. I wrote a profile on Gary Payton II about halfway through this season. I thought he was one of the best stories in the NBA. Spent about 5 years on the fringes, on two-way contracts, playing in the G League, always on a non-guaranteed deal. Even this year, it didn't guarantee until January 10th, and he was sort of paranoid about whether or not that would even happen. I think at this point, he has to know he is getting a multi-year deal. He is getting a guaranteed contract for the first time in his NBA career. It's all happening at the age of 29 for Gary Payton II, and he has really earned it. He has become a crucial part of this Warriors team, and you've seen it on the biggest stage there is.
Yeah, he's been exceptional. He is such an important player to what they do. I also hope he sticks around in Golden State. I'm a little more not skeptical. I have some worries he's not going to be there, and that's reflected. And I'm going to throw out a number. It's not my number. It's a number an NBA source gave me, who's been very reliable. I promise I haven't been drinking, and neither had he. But I've had people tell me, including this person, that $40 to $50 million over 3 or 4 years for Gary Payton II isn't unreasonable. That might be the market if he decides he wants to go somewhere else where they're not going to win, where they have a bunch of money, where they're willing to take a flyer, as James said, on a guy who's almost 30. And so I think the question will be whether or not GP2 wants to make a good living, make a really good living, and stay in a place where he's had success, where he's from, where his dad GP is from, or whether in this one opportunity, and it might be the one opportunity, cash in on what he's done, cash in on the shine of Steph Curry. That does have an enhancement effect. It always, for players, when they have these scary moments like we saw in the Memphis series, where they see their season and maybe their career flash before their eyes in terms of injury, maybe there's a little more of an appetite for him to see what's out there. I talked to his dad. I worked with Gary Payton, the original, Gary Payton the first. I don't know what we call GP, the original GP, because we used to work together. I talked to him at the finals, tried to get him to tell me whether or not his son might, threw the $50 million out there. He just laughed and said things are good for now. But I do think there's a potential inflated market for GP2 that'll be really interesting, and that's the consequence of success when this finals is over and he has the opportunity to see what he's actually worth out there.
As mentioned, 29 years old, certainly a great opportunity to have. There's been some great player stories in the NBA this year. Certainly GP2 has to be considered among the best of them. All right, lastly, we have to discuss quite possibly the breakout player of these finals, of the playoffs, Grant Williams. He's in the third year of his rookie deal. He's up for an extension. He's a solid role player for the Celtics, James. Do the Celtics go through with the extension, or do they wait until he becomes a restricted free agent?
Yeah, that's the tough part. I mean, are they incentivized to lock him up? Sure. Like they right now on this team that they have basically no players of consequence on expiring contracts this summer. That has been Brad Stevens' MO since becoming the president of basketball operations for the Celtics. He wants to have guys locked up, but they're going to have to come to an agreement here, and they don't really, it's not like there's competition. He is not hitting free agency yet. A lot of times teams in this position, if you're not talking about a max guy, they're automatically going to hand that contract to. If they're going to sign you early, then they want the player to give them a little bit of a hometown discount. And will Grant Williams do that? I don't know. He must surely be happy with the role that he is playing there. He has been able to play a crucial role on a winning team. He's done it on these big stages. You've seen him guarding the likes of Kevin Durant, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, and really making a name for himself to the casual NBA fan during these playoffs, where I think some of the nerdier types among us, myself included, have been like in on Grant Williams from the start. This is where people have kind of learned his name, and there will be other teams interested in Grant Williams, but Boston is basically asking, like, are you willing to give us a discount this summer so we can secure your future on this team where everything is going great and you just went to the finals?
Yeah, James is right. This is a Grant Williams question. It just has to do with whether or not he thinks that he's worth more money than the Celtics do and where his headspace is at. And this is always a difficult decision for anybody in their NBA career. How do you balance security, right? Money today versus the potential for more money down the line. Now, it's obviously a lot easier to get these deals done and to at least have a higher likelihood of selling players on taking less, given a hometown discount, given a discount to the team that you're a part of if things are going well and you like each other and the locker room's a happy place and you're in the NBA Finals, or maybe you win an NBA championship. So Boston has certainly, just with their success, has put themselves in a position to make a pitch to this guy and say, look, you're a big part of it. You have a huge future. This is a lot of money. We're in it for the long haul. Give us a little flexibility to keep building this thing, and it'll be up to Grant Williams to decide whether or not that's what he wants to do at this stage.
NBA writer and analyst Bill Reiter and CBS Sports NBA writer James Herbert joining us from Boston ahead of Game 3 between the Celtics and the Warriors. Thank you very much, gentlemen, as we kind of kick the can down the road a bit, looking at some of the players that could be looking at contract moves this coming off season. Right, the Celtics chasing their 18th title, which would give them the single most all-time. Warriors in the chase for their 7th in history, both looking to take the series lead tonight in Boston. As you take a look at how the schedule looks for the remainder of the series, the Warriors have won at least one road game in each of their last 26 playoff series. Celtics have dropped 4 of their last 7 at home. Both teams looking to take the lead tonight. Should be a dynamite game tip-off set for 9 p.m. Speaking of the Heat, let's talk about them off the top. And President Pat Riley was asked about adding to the roster this summer. Before I get your guys' take, here's what he had to say when asked about that.
There's something from outside that avails itself that doesn't cost us an arm and a leg that could fit that bill, then I'd always be interested in looking at that. But I think we have what we need internally, but we'll see, from that standpoint.
Certainly a Heat, one of those teams that were close to making that leap. Bill, who would be the best free agent move or best offseason target for the Heat?
Yeah, when Pat Riley is not challenging the media to push-ups in a contest, Pat, you would absolutely win. I covered that team 10 years ago. It's true then. It's true now. I mean, this is an organization that has championship aspirations today, right now. Pat Riley burns more than as much as any competitor in the sport to win more championships and to get a championship post-LeBron James. It is a motivating factor. It's talked about in that organization. So, sure, they'll go out there and they'll try to find guys with high upside. They felt good about Kyle Lowry. Didn't quite work out. They felt it was worth the risk on Victor Oladipo. To a degree, it did work out, and Oladipo's going to probably be expensive and maybe be somewhere else. So I think you're going to see that organization, guys, and just talking to folks within and outside of it, who are going to kick the tires on some big game hunting. Can they go get Joel Embiid? Of course not, but that is their dream scenario. But Bradley Beal, I think, is a little more realistic. We're waiting to see, the whole league's waiting to see whether or not Beal is going to stay in Washington. That is the general sense people have, because Beal has kept his business very private and very low-key. But the Miami Heat would love to be able to find that kind of a player, whether it's in free agency or it's a trade. They do have some young pieces. They do have some guys they can move on from. That organization, even though they've drafted better the last few years, and they have, do not, over the course of Riley's tenure, they have not really valued draft picks that much. Sure, they hit on Dwayne Wade, they got that right, but there's also Michael Beasley, and they just have a culture of believing the culture is more important than individual young players. So I think Bradley Beal's an interesting target for the Heat, and I think big names, Donovan Mitchell. I know Embiid's not available, but Embiid flirted with them on Twitter a little bit. Anyone that they get a sense is available that is a big name, Pat Riley would happily pay a gigantic price, because for him, at his age, he wants a championship while he can get it. And I think they know, guys, within that organization, they're almost there, but they're not close enough, and they need another star with Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, I think obviously, going for the big names would be ideal for the Heat, but in the scenario where that's not available, I think they just kind of need to keep their house in order, right? They don't have a lot of options out there on the free agent market if they can't pull one of these big trades in terms of impact players. So I think their primary priority should be extending Tyler Hero. The last thing you want is a Deandre Ayton situation in Phoenix where you don't pay the guy, you play out the year, and suddenly you start to think, do they want me here? Things start to boil over and create tension there. So that's the last thing you want. I think you give Tyler Hero an extension, probably not the max, but maybe somewhere in the 120, 130 range seems reasonable for him. And then you're also bridging the gap to the future. As we saw in the playoffs, Kyle Lowry getting hurt, Jimmy Butler playing through injuries, PJ Tucker is old. All these people, we don't know how long they're going to be able to perform at this level. So you want to get a guy who can pair with Bam Adebayo to kind of bridge the gap into the future of the Heat. Also, by extending Tyler Hero, you increase his salary. So that way, if one of these guys does become available, Hero's salary is closer to matching those kind of big game players that Bill was talking about, and they might be able to swing that deal with a chip. But to me, primary objective this offseason is to extend Hero, keep him happy, and help bridge the gap to the future.
Okay, what about for the Bucks? I mean, they essentially had just 2 NBA-ready players on their bench, so we know that is a big area of concern for them. So what's the best move for the Bucks when you look forward here, Colin?
To me, it's similar to Miami. They don't have a lot of options because of all the money they're paying to their stars. So I think they just need to get Bobby Portis back in the fold. As you mentioned, that bench unit is thin, and so Portis is even more important to come in and be able to give them scoring, give them energy. Obviously, he's beloved in the city of Milwaukee. He did them a huge favor last summer by taking a much smaller contract than anticipated. It was shocking when we saw that he was taking a $4.8 million deal, something like that. He has an option for this year. He's expected to decline that and seek out, hey, I did you guys a favor, now give me some money. So I think that's what's going to happen. And for the Bucks, it's really important. They got rid of Dante DiVincenzo and brought in Serge Ibaka. That didn't work. So obviously they're going to need a backup player like the caliber of Bobby Portis. And for what he's done for that city and for that team, I think that's their primary goal this offseason, is to make sure that he gets back in the fold.
I sort of just want to say, get Chris Middleton healthy, which is going to happen, obviously, and that's going to get the Bucks back to where they want to be, and they were already there, highly competitive. But Colin is right. In the margins, they don't have a lot of options, and they don't need a lot of options. They're extremely well constructed. There is a depth issue, but they're obviously one of the best teams in the NBA when everybody is healthy. And that big man scenario is the scenario they have to look at. Colin's right. Bobby Portis Jr. getting tied back down is critical. Now, what'll be interesting, as Colin said, is that Portis took less money, a lot less money than he had to, and he way outplayed that contract. And I've heard Lakers officials that I've talked to, people in that Portland organization. I haven't talked to Spurs officials, but I've heard the Spurs. Everybody's interested. And it depends on the number, but Portis has played himself back into a guy who can be valuable to a team that has some aspirations. If Bobby Portis Jr. goes, then the move is to try to find some level of replacement. Maybe I can't believe I'm pitching Dwight Howard. Maybe it's a Dwight Howard, not the move that I would make, but a name that was thrown at me by some folks in and around that Bucks organization. But Colin's right. We don't know, I don't know, whether Bobby Portis Jr. wants to take another massive salary pay cut in order to be in Milwaukee, but he seems happy there. He's a hard guy to read, even from people who know him and talk to him on a day-to-day basis. He's beloved in that city. They can be NBA champions. And so the Portis question, A, is the most important, and B, if that's the most important question in your organization, you're in really good shape.
And to Colin's point with the Heat, I mean, you don't really have a lot of room to maneuver, so you've got to make sure that you're shoring up well, which you have, if you look to keep contending for a title. The Mavericks went as far as Luka Doncic could take them on his own this past season. A great season for the franchise, but now they know what's limiting them in terms of being able to take that next step. So what do the Mavericks do this offseason in terms of additions, Bill?
Yeah, they need another star. And with all respect, or maybe it's not respect to Jalen Brunson, I'm not paying that guy. I just don't think it fits. We saw it doesn't fit with Luka Doncic. This comes down to what Zach LaVine wants to do, right? And what his goals are and where he wants to be. And it's not Chicago, which is where he's at, and they built around him. And it's not the West Coast, obviously, where he's from. But I think that we're going to find that Luka Doncic is a huge draw for players. And if he is available and if he makes himself available, if I'm Dallas, that is the person, outside of Bradley Beal certainly would fit, or Donovan Mitchell, who's not available, you'd have to trade for. That is the guy that I want. And I personally think that he's a guy who, when he's not playing on one leg, when he's healthy, can be an extraordinary difference maker as a second best player on a would-be championship team. And we know the Mavericks are that because we saw what they did in that run of the conference finals. So for me, if I'm Dallas, if I'm Mark Cuban, if I'm that organization, I want to go get someone who can score the basketball, who can help my team and help my superstar take a little bit of the load off, and that's Zach LaVine for me.
Yeah, I agree with Phil. I mean, if we're dreaming big here, saying who is the target, who is the guy that they really need to go out and get to make a difference, to get over the hump, I think it was pretty clear that the Mavericks were far short of the Warriors in terms of talent and what it takes to get to the NBA Finals. So bring in a guy like Zach LaVine. I mean, if you were going to construct a player in a lab who would be a perfect complement to Luka Doncic, it's Zach LaVine. He can shoot the ball. He can play off the ball. He can also run pick and rolls, run offense while Luka Doncic is on the bench, which has primarily or traditionally been really, really bad minutes for the Mavericks. So having a guy like LaVine come in and take that pressure off of Luka with all that shooting, I think would just be the ideal scenario. Now, Mark Cuban has had trouble getting big name free agents to come in, despite kind of the positive, putting video games in the locker rooms, all those things he did in the early 2000s. They haven't traditionally had the best time getting free agents. So it would be up to Zach LaVine. But as Bill said, if you're looking at superstars in this league, who you would want to play next to, Luka Doncic has to be primarily one of the top guys, if not the top guy, based on his ability to score the ball and to get you open looks and to just lead to a winning team. So Zach LaVine would be my primary target if I'm the Mavs. I don't know if that's possible, but that would be the best case scenario for them.
Two of our top NBA guys, Colin Ward-Henninger and Bill Reiter, giving us their thoughts on some of the offseason moves that we could see with some of the contending teams in the NBA. Thank you very much, gentlemen. In terms of the top 10 free agents, here's what we have listed for you over on CBSSports.com. James Harden tops the list. You just heard the guys talk about Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, part of that conversation as well. You can see the full list over on CBSSports.com.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.